Princeton Open Campus Coalition is a Princeton University student-run group committed to exercising and defending academic freedom. Its only position is the existence of free speech and its commitment to its civil exercise. This podcast is dedicated to giving a voice to the free-thinking civil persons with uncommon or unwanted ideas. The individual opinions of members of the Princeton Open Campus Coalition or any other speakers invited do not represent the official Princeton Open Campus Coalition stance. To learn more, visit our website, pocc.princeton.edu.
Okay, I don't know how to start this.
I think we can start by introducing ourselves. I'm David. I'm taking a gap year, but I'm going to be rejoining Princeton in junior year next year.
I'm Rebecca, and I'm a senior in the CV department. I'm just excited for this discussion on racial inequality and solutions to solve this issue. So.
Hey all, my name is Peter Colvin. I'm also a senior in the Chemical and Biological Engineering department, and I'm excited to be a part of this.
So my name is Tyler. I'm a senior in the astrophysics department, and I'm equally excited to be part of the conversation.
So, I mean, as we all know, like, we deeply care about this issue, and we do have an interest in finding solutions for these issues, and that's really the purpose of this discussion, to just introduce like new ideas or new ways as to which we could combat this issue. Because we only hear like one solution, but we never take the time to actually analyze and look at other possibilities and nuances that are going on. Because what we see right now that's going on is really a symptom of like a deeper problem that we should be solving. At least that's my opinion. For instance, police brutality is a deeper problem. It's something that we should be solving with regards to like, I don't know, police reform or criminal justice reform. And just, for instance, topics like education or affirmative action is a deeper problem that has to do with how are Black Americans, particularly in low-income areas, being educated? How are they being taught, whether in their homes or whether in their schools? How is their schooling system like? So really the purpose of this is try to dig deeper and try to see as to how we could really tackle these issues. Anyone could add in on that.
Yeah, I was going to say that we all kind of disagree on at least in somewhat on what the solutions could be, but we all agree that most of our ideas are not visible in the public forum. They're not getting the attention. The ideas are certainly representative of a collective of ideas, and these aren't being properly addressed, and there's a bit of a kind of a hijacking of the discussion that this conversation is hopefully trying to be a solution to. So should we start on the agreements?
Yeah, let's start with that. I don't know if you want to start the moderation process, David.
Yeah, I guess we were going to talk about welfare reform. If you guys have any ideas about that, maybe stating what the problem is, what the current situation is, and then maybe what are some solutions. And
yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kick it off, but it's, I think more or less we have a lot of agreement. I think interestingly, a lot of things have changed as far as, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but we all in some way or another agree in a need of social safety nets. So nobody's in favor of completely disbanding them. Is that true, or?
Well, personally for me, I have this very absolutist like opinion of that the government should not be involved in like providing a safety net for people. But like for this particular context, I'm willing to like yield that and say, okay, hey, this is like a like people are in unfortunate situations. We're in a situation where let's say a group of people has been like wrongfully treated historically. It would be appropriate, at least for those who have undergone some like financial instability or some sort of like instability, to at least have that sort of like security. So at this point, I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, I would say it really depends on the situation. I mean, because you think about it, you know, we have 300 some odd million Americans. There's a lot of different things that people are dealing with. I mean, people living with disabilities, you know, aging parents, things like that, stretching the budget. You know, I understand certain needs. I like to look at solutions that rely on government removing actions that it's currently taking that are harming the people, rather than adding more. Example of this is eliminating or decreasing sales taxes on whole foods, healthy foods especially. You know, just that's a basic necessity everybody needs, and the government makes a lot of money on taxes on just about everything else. And then a little bit, you know, another thing I talked about is looking at, okay, receiving, you know, welfare benefits, unemployment, things like that. Having one thing I think I mentioned in the document, we were kind of drafting up some ideas, was having a form where if you're receiving welfare benefits, kind of a sort of resume would be put together of, you know, things you had done and sent out to companies, and without personal identifying information, without your name or anything like that, by through unemployment. And then they would then the companies that are interested would pull you in. They get a tax benefit for pulling you in off of unemployment, perhaps, you know, the equivalent of a month's worth of the unemployment payment for the company. And then the person receiving the unemployment benefits would also get kind of a bonus perk for finding a job, which would also help them, you know, purchase necessary supplies they need, whatever that may be. It's something I thought might be kind of interesting.
Oh yeah. Also, just like preamble before I actually give my perspective on it or additions to it. So what I recognize after doing a little bit of reading is that the current welfare system has a large federal spending of $28 trillion, and we only use 1.1 trillion of that. And so what I recognize is that they focus on the process, but never so much the results. So what happens is that you have a system where it's expected to, at least how I see it, it's expected to encourage them who are in unfortunate situations to actually work and to actually like have a stable life. However, how the system works is that they pay you, they give you like whatever you need. But if you work above that, or if you're married, for instance, then they'll actually like deduct from your welfare. So you actually get more welfare if you're in a single parent household or if you have more children. Essentially, you have like a bunch of women who are married to the government, which is not very productive. So what I would like propose really is to first eliminate marriage penalties in the system. I feel like that's one of the reasons why we have a high percentage amount of single mothered households.
What are marriage penalties? What are marriage penalties?
So by marriage penalties, I mean like, for instance, if you're married, then you have deductions in your welfare, or your welfare gets taken away. That's what I mean by that. So what happens, at least my perspective, is that you've demonstrated that there's no purpose of having like a familiar structure, for instance. There's no purpose in working. There's no purpose in having like a regular familial structure. So you just have broken families, and you just have a lot of people without purpose turning over to more crime-related activities, which is something we don't want. And it also leads to like an increase in crime. At least that's my perspective on it. Someone can correct me on that. I feel that we should focus on directing more welfare instead towards those who are unable to work, as opposed to those who are able and could actually contribute to what they get, so they can get themselves off of welfare. And I actually agree with you, Peter, on having some sort of reform, let's say with food stamps, so that there's a discount with more nutritional items, with those types of items, and have certain like job or like graduation types of benefits. But we should also, most importantly, have some transparency with the welfare program as well, as to, like with regards to how much is being spent and like where this money is being directed to as well. Because I feel like a lot of these things are just very hidden. No one really knows what's going on.
I think I agree with you, Rebecca, in that, you know, the family unit is a properly functioning family unit is one of the best stabilizers of society, and promoting the welfare of the kids. I mean, you look at future employment statistics, schooling statistics of the kids in a functioning two-parent household. It's huge. And the thing is, there is a big disparity. About only 45% of African American households contain a married couple, in comparison to 80% for whites or 70% among Hispanics, according to the latest census. And it's interesting because the trend it's gone in reverse. African Americans were more likely to be married than white Americans from 1890 until sometime in the 1960s. So it's interesting to see this kind of reversal there, and it has a huge impact on future outcomes for the kids especially.
Yeah, I think on this I would definitely agree with you guys, with just an emphasis that the fact that it incentivizes not having a job, to me, is an issue, but it's the greatest issue is that it de-incentivizes having a family structure, which I would agree is one of the most important. I think high school, whether you have a high school diploma and whether or not you're married when you have children, is a much greater factor or an indicator of whether or not you'll be below the poverty threshold than race across the board. So that's, this equally applies to white people and Hispanics. And this is something that Black Lives Matter is, with no uncertain words, has said that they're against, that they're against the Western nuclear family, something, I think we probably all agree is harmful, 100%. And yeah, I would just say that one common retort I've heard is that they use the statistics for the Black households are less likely to be married. They say, well, they're there. The father's there, they're just gaming the system, and they're not married. And my response to that always is, there's a reason for marriage, and you can see this anywhere across all races. You can't get in a fight and leave. There's something tying you, tethering you to this family unit a lot more. I just, I don't, single motherhood is an issue across all races. It's just something that's, an issue more so in the Black community.
Yeah, I can read off some statistics, but like 85% of youth who are currently in prison grew up in a fatherless home. 7 out of every 10 youth that are housed in correctional facilities came from a fatherless home. It's just crazy statistics. Like, you're more likely to do crime more likely to commit murder, more likely to deal drugs and carry firearms illegally. It's just everything. You're more likely to be poor. It's just everything is just on every dimension. Living in a fatherless home is terrible. Like, name a
And
single dimension of human, I don't know, prosperity or
I think
good living. It just goes, the probability goes down if you live in a fatherless home. The statistics are clear on that.
And I think one of the big things too is it's not just a fatherless home, but you want to make sure that the home is healthy too. You know, there's a lot of stigma around marriage counseling, from my understanding, within you know, both the white but also the African American community, from what I've heard, and you know that's. You know, that's important. I understand, you know, Rebecca was talking with me a bit about some healthcare stigmatizations, mental health stigmatizations, and that all plays into the health of the family, and healthy family really contributes a lot for the kids. I didn't know if you want to touch on that, Rebecca.
Oh yeah, I could also backtrack. I think there's also some importance of recognizing that there needs to be some sort of father figure, especially since mostly Black males are the ones who are experiencing most of the crime-related issues that we're seeing today. I don't know. That's like a personal observation. I feel like a lot of young Black males just need some sort of role model instead of believing that they're just going to be stuck in this position forever and just drug dealing and just playing basketball, but never really actually having some sort of like objectives or goals in their life, especially when there's no one to relate to them as to how they could just like break out of this cycle, for instance. And yeah, I agree with regards to like familial counseling and even marriage counseling, as well as significance of having some sort of like healthcare initiatives to really focus on certain issues, let's say cardiovascular diseases or cancer diseases. I read on the CDC, like one of the leading causes of deaths for non-Hispanic Black people is actually cardiovascular diseases. No one really pays attention to that, believe it or not. So I think a lot should be focused with regards to just like general screening and background checks of prioritizing looking at these specific diseases as well as specific nutritional deficiencies that come up for those who are living in inner city situations.
And I just want to push back against that a little bit, because it's not only males, but the statistics for females are also pretty grim. Like, girls who live in a fatherless home have 100% higher risk of suffering from obesity and 4 times more likely to become mothers before the age of 20. And it's all not good. It's just not good.
Jump in on that. The health statistics. It's something that I constantly run into that it really kind of bothers me, because it's used in a manipulative way a lot of times to present, you know, so if you address it like, you know, cardiovascular risks in the Black community, this is a serious issue and can be mitigated somewhat with the proper care, but intention is always shifted away from it. And 2 perfect examples that are constantly in the headlines are maternal death rates during childbirth, and right now COVID deaths. The most likely way, you know, is it SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, the attack. This is one of the most likely ways for you to perish, especially for older age people. And this is clearly going to have a greater impact on people who already have a predisposition for cardiovascular risk. And the same thing is for maternal death rates. The number 1 cause for maternal death rates is cardiovascular issues. And so both of these things are constantly pointed to as having higher numbers of death rates in the Black community. And then the explanation is always racism. And the CDC in the past has pointed at these things and then looked at issues that are endemic in just the Black community and ways of resolving it. And you can see that over time they've shifted away, and their narrative is becoming, racism. And that's not to say that, hospital locations and all these things are certainly in effect, and the quality of healthcare, but also there's obvious issues that are completely being swept under the rug, and in my opinion, in my viewpoint, are much more of a serious cause, and to be able to use this to manipulate the political narrative is wrong, and it's causing much more harm by sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah. Another thing to add, like health wise, is that actually sickle cell anemia is found among more African American communities just for genetic purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a big precursor.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Chaddington. Man, I can't remember his full name. I'll look it up. But one of his arguments for why race is not a biological or a social indicator is that Greeks are also very susceptible to sickle cell anemia. I'll look up his name real quick if you guys want to keep going.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said, Tyler. I think it's a really important point, because much of the discussion right now is, I mean, maybe it's for another discussion, but it's observing some statistical disparity and then just assuming it's some sort of systemic racism. I completely agree. There's absolutely no depth to the discussion. It's like such a shallow argument. It's like one-dimensional, one-size-fits-all answer. Observe a problem with disparity between, I don't know, blacks or whites or whatever race is. Just say it's racism. It's so easy. You don't have to think about it even for a second. You don't have to think, well, maybe there's something wrong with the culture. Maybe there's complicated, issues. Even adding, just for a second, just a little thinking about the rates of fatherlessness and all these other welfare issues and things like that, it just blows a hole open right into that logic.
Yeah, so I just want to plug Thomas Chatterton Williams. He has awesome arguments for why race is not a biological or social indicator of any worth. And he's a product of an interracial marriage. He's in an interracial marriage. I think he has such an honest and interesting approach to this conversation. So should we, go over some more things that we agree with? Welfare, family reform, healthcare, community initiatives. Anything about that?
Yeah, who wants to start the ball rolling on that? Because I think, Peter, you had some good stuff on that.
Yeah, I think you had a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, there's, I mean, the thing is, everything builds into each other. So some of my ideas cross over into business and then healthcare, and it's all overlapping. I really consider, opportunity zones with slightly different tax rates to be important. I consider free vocational seminars to be huge. One thing is promoting. Rebecca was telling me that there's in the Black community that there's a diverse to a lot of concern about healthcare and kind of a fear of how it's applied and things sometimes.
There's a distrust among certain Black people, especially with the whole Tuskegee experiment, and there's been a lot of let's say caution.
Among, what is that? What is that?
So you remember during during World War II? Let me just pull up the actual thing. But essentially, the whole test was to put vaccine a couple of airmen who fought World War II pretty much. And the test contained a syphilis virus, but they didn't mention that to them. So that was that's part of the reason. I'm just trying to pull up to see if I can get the full details. But that's one of the reasons why they don't tend to trust, in particular, vaccinations and in particular doctors, because they're just like, what are you going to do to us now?
Yeah.
um, Especially with abortion, but that's like another topic.
Yeah, and that's why I was thinking maybe a more community-centric healthcare approach where the states would support, doctors who would help, if they're going to go to like a state med school, work on helping them get business loans from the SBA, help them. The SBA is such an undertapped resource for minority communities. It's Small Business Administration, and it could really be leveraged more. But if the state government would help people from their area go get their medical degree in state, and then help pay for that, and then help them get a Small Business Administration loan to start a clinic in their area, I think that would increase people's levels of comfort. It would help create a sense of community as far as the healthcare goes. I think that could have a huge impact there as far as dental, eye, basic stuff like that. I know that's been successful in the Native American community. That's something that they've used where they'll pay for med school if you'll work for 2 to 3 years in the tribal clinic, and a ton of success there. A lot of family-centric community events is something I was interested in. Public classes on conflict resolution, communication, financial literacy. One thing that was a little different that I was suggesting is more regulation of liquor licenses. It's very interesting. Hopkins did a study on this, and essentially every percent of, like, they're looking at Baltimore specifically, but in Baltimore over the years, every percent more liquor stores were added, a 0.5% increase in the violent crime rate associated with it. And it really depended on the type of liquor store. So like an on-site liquor store, like a bar or tavern or something like that, was not associated with as much of a rise in violent crime as in a liquor store. You go, you take your liquor, you bring it back home, which was kind of interesting. And so just little things like that. Zoning laws are hugely important for looking at making sure neighborhoods are healthy and things like that. So that was something I was kind of looking at. But
what are zoning laws? What is that?
So, well, my family's done a lot with real estate, so I've been indoctrinated with this over the years. Essentially, a zoning law gives you it's very local. So usually state, or usually even county level. And what it'll do is it'll kind of set what sort of permissible businesses or activities can be done in certain areas. Some areas you can only do single family housing. Some are designated for apartment complexes. Some are designated for certain types of commercial endeavors. Others are for industrial sectors. So it's a way of city planning that partitions the city out to kind of separate different areas. And there's a lot of controversy as to the effectiveness of certain zoning schemes having a disproportionate impact on minority communities by kind of clustering or different things like that. And so just looking at these zoning laws and seeing, okay, because there's like limits, for example, like on marijuana distributors in Washington State, you can only be on certain frequency, certain areas, etc. Looking at it, you can't be too close to a school, things like that. So looking at these zoning laws and tuning them to help make sure that the community is going to have healthy access to grocery stores and gas stations, and maybe limiting these the zoning for the liquor stores and reducing their clustering or their frequency for new permits. It's an interesting power that the counties have.
Yeah, so I just want to be cognizant of time. I know we there's a couple other things that we all agreed on. One was the return of manufacturing. I think we were all in agreement. That's, you know, something that would just help bolster the middle class across the board. And there's manufacturing that has to exist in cities. So there's just a disproportionate effect there. And then the other one was police reform. I don't know if either of you guys want to hit on that. I think there's a lot we agree on, and maybe we could expand on it here and do something, you know, like an addition later, or we can do like a separate on these ideas, because I think, you know, you guys have a lot of really awesome ideas, but we definitely wanted to drill down on some things that we disagreed on, and we have about 30 minutes left, so what do you guys want to do?
No, yeah. I mean, let's just like say briefly. We don't have to go on a whole synopsis of like what we think about police reform. So like personally, I don't think it's not the biggest issue that we're trying to solve, but it's one of the issues. And I found this interesting statistic from Gallup that said 81% of Black Americans would rather have the police and more. So that's pretty interesting. I do think there should be investment in higher standards for police training, as well as periodic training. And with training, there should be emphasis on legalities and de-escalation.
Are you saying they should be funded more than defunded? Is that what you're saying?
Higher salary.
That's another separate discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd take a little bit of a different tack. Like, I can understand some calls for bloated police budgets and things like that. I don't think the solution is to instantaneously defund the police and hope that other programs will arise to cover the variety of social benefits that police have provided. I think it takes a little bit more of a nuanced long-term perspective and looking at these programs. But definitely one thing that I would provide more funding to is police kind of like mental health issues. Police officers are I think it's 1 in 4 police officers consider suicide. Mental health is really, really awful in the police community. So, and that definitely doesn't contribute to healthy interactions with the public. So I think, you know, making sure there's funding there, making sure that there's support, and making sure police are taking time off, things like that, to relax and proper training, I think is essential. But yeah.
Yeah, every police officer I know works a second job, so that's an issue. I mean, I don't understand. I think we all agree that they have one of the most important jobs, and I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in discussing that they are being asked to do things that should be outside. You know, they're social workers, they're mental health workers, they're police officers all in one, and we don't even pay them enough to be able to feed their families without a second job. So yeah, I don't think it would be surprising at all to hear those figures on mental health, considering the stress that any one of those jobs would have. So I would definitely say higher pay, and I don't know if you guys are okay with using this as a transition, but I think it goes hand in hand with higher pay in teachers in public schools. I mean, we're asking people to do the most important jobs in the country for, you know, $45,000, $50,000 a year, and it just seems absurd to me. But I don't know if that's an acceptable transition for you guys. But.
No, I think that's great. I will say though, I'm kind of like hesitant on increasing like pay for certain teachers. So for instance, I have a thing against teacher unions. And I also have a thing against using like public school funding or just funding in general to ineffectively hire teachers just because they have a master's degree, as opposed to actually hiring teachers because they have the credentials to teach. So I mean, I agree with the fact that we should raise prices, but I think what we should really focus on though is how can we properly allocate the money for school funding. Because what I recognize is that with certain schools, there are initiatives where they either like the legislators or the school board that just like don't really know where to invest the money in. I think there's a lack of that. So I'd rather focus on that first instead of just saying, let's just fund it more, or let's just increase the pay more. I don't know. What's your take on that?
First, can I ask, how does that relate to kind of the idea of kind of racial disparity? Like, is there a disparity between funding for education Black communities? Do they have worse teachers? What is the situation on that?
I have a little bit of information on that. I don't know as far as disparities on funding. I know that that exists. I've heard about it, but I don't know the specifics. But as far as high school dropout rate, which is a huge indicator of future earnings, and then also the amount of taxes you pay, so from a pure balance the budget perspective, it's but more than 1 in 5 Blacks drop out of school. That's 21%, give or take, versus a dropout rate for whites of 12%. And high school dropouts earn about $500,000 less in their lifetime, and high school graduates contribute about $250,000 over their life in taxes, versus a high school dropout is actually a net negative for tax. We spend, you know, maybe a few billion a year, but we're actually losing in tax dollars over 600 billion annually. So this is definitely an issue that for some odd reason hasn't taken enough priority. You know, I'm looking at a study right now that was done during Obama's administration, and the economic consequences are huge. The social consequences are huge. So, you know, that's a huge disparity. I don't know why that necessarily is, why there's that difference, whether that is at its core a funding issue or what. I don't know.
So I don't know. Are we okay with doing some like screen sharing? I can show you. So these are some. I hadn't intended to show you these, but I can show you some flyers.
Yeah, I enable screen share, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is going to be really ad hoc, but let's see, how can I do this? Okay. So I grew up around Detroit, Indianapolis, Flint. So you can see like Detroit public schools, there's a number of public schools that are, you know, close to half graduation rate, and minority enrollment's almost 100%. So you can see similar figures. While Flint is always pretty painful to look at, 30% with a high minority enrollment. And then, yeah, so Indianapolis, pretty low numbers. So you can kind of see these. I can, just from personal experience, there's a huge difference. You can look at these schools and what their student to teacher ratio is. Like I said, these are teachers that are like social workers, mental health workers, getting $45,000 a year to be in these bloated classrooms with students that don't want to be there, teaching a mandatory curriculum that's just not effective in my opinion. And I guess for my whole motivation in this argument is that so a lot of the motivation would be that there's things that we should have universal agreement on, and the level, the bare minimum on what our education our children are going to receive should have universal agreement. I have no problem if you want to send your kid to Orange School or Princeton. If you want to spend $50,000 a year, that's it's fine. But I think our public schools should be significantly better than even the ones that I went to. And I wasn't in downtown, these downtown areas, and when we find universal agreement on something, it has to be brought to the federal level. So right now, we spend $4 trillion a year on a budget. 800 billion goes to the military. 3 billion is going to healthcare and social net or welfare programs, and we spend like 50 billion on the public schools. And we expect and we allow the states to determine their own budgets, is where most of this comes from. It's usually a huge burden on the states. Then you see just massive varying degrees. So I grew up in Michigan and Indiana. The size of the budgets of either are so drastically different. It's wild. It just kind of, I mean, if you imagine that we're talking about how can we reduce welfare programs. Well, we spend $3 trillion a year on welfare programs, and we spend $50 billion on federal education. Imagine if you spent $1 trillion once on education in the country. What would the reduction in what we spend that $3 trillion annually on welfare programs? I'm just a strong believer that if you educate the people that are in these circumstances, they're going to find their solutions, whether you like it or not. And it's just a priority. I could switch over and talk about how it's an issue that we only have 20 billion for NASA, but it's where should our priorities be? And when 50 billion federally, opposed to 800 in the military and 3 trillion in welfare. No wonder that we have such an enduring problem that's not going to fix itself. That's my opinion.
I do agree that we need to look at funding more carefully, but I don't think throwing money at it's going to solve anything, because actually, we've increased over the years dramatically public funding for, the K through 12 system, and we've seen test scores decline or stay stagnant. The Cato Institute is seeing the average performance change nationwide has declined 3% in mathematical and verbal. We're seeing, I don't relation in between directly increasing funding and the benefits for the students. I think there's some reorganization that needs to happen. The administration of the school takes a lot of the funding. So as far as U.S. public schools growth in students and school personnel, for students in between 1950 and 2009, 96% growth. Teachers, 252% growth. But administration and other staff, that's a 700% growth. So like the school budgets, I do agree increasing funding is important, but right now we're just bloating.
It's like how the budget is allocated. That's really that's like, I agree with what you're saying. It's just like, how is the budget being allocated? Which is why I'm just like, okay, well, let me first show you what I found. One of my biggest concerns is really the literacy rate and the quantitative rate among Black students. So it's this is from 1992 to 2003. So as you can see, this Hispanic and Black people, their scores are lower in prose and document writing, as well as in quantitative, as opposed to their white or Asian counterparts. And one of the reasons why I would rather focus more on a school system that would allow for more independency and autonomous, an autonomous standard, is because it will allow us to set a certain standard for a literacy rate by the 3rd or 4th grade for Black students, as opposed to depending on like a statewide or a national standard, and we're not actually accomplishing anything. One of the reasons why I lean more towards, not so much that I wanted to like eliminate public schools. I think they should be important too. But one of the reasons why I support charter schools, for instance, or private school education in inner cities is because those schools are specifically tailored to actually cater to people who are having these like these educational disparities, because a lot more time and focus is put on these students, and it's been demonstrated with certain like successful cases that their reading and test scores for Black and Hispanic students has actually increased. I think it was like a school, like a study of like 22 or 30 charter schools or something like that.
What are charter schools? Can you quickly explain that for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, so like a charter school, like it could be like a public charter school or a private charter school, whatever. But it's a school that receives like government funding as well, but it operates like very independently from the established like state school system. So it's like a very autonomous school system, although it's like publicly funded. And I feel like one of the important things, which is something I've read in some reports, is that it can actually inspire the students from low-income areas to actually break the poverty cycle and to move on to do more successful things. And if we get like parental support, just like going back to the importance of having familial values in these communities, it can actually enhance the school educational system more, such that their children are more like interested and invested in actually learning. So that's one of the reasons why I particularly am interested in investing more in more educational systems that would allow us to have more like creativity and autonomy with setting these sort of standards. But,
Is there an opposition to charter schools?
Yeah, so I mean, usually the opposition is the people who want public schools. There's a really interesting ongoing debate about Detroit. If you look at Detroit, so Walmart, the family is a Walton family, have taken on education in Detroit as their, one of their big things, but they will only fund private schools. So this is now it's a very divisive thing where I just showed you the figures for Detroit public schools, where these schools are doing terrible. And whereas charter schools, which are known to be successful for the people who get into them, are doing well because they have the support. And that's where it just, to me, it all comes back that it should never, there's a minimum standard that needs to be met. And regardless of what family or where you come from, it shouldn't matter. You can see in New York, they're battling these vouchers where you can be a low income person and get accepted to the higher end schools. Well, the issue is that the schools are so unequal to begin with. As far as I would never say just throw money at it. For me to say that the federal budget should increase for something, I'm of the opinion that anything that the government touch, it makes worse. But there's also like a kind of a person or a part of the conversation. So, the military budget we spend, the U.S. doesn't make, our jets. The U.S. doesn't, or the U.S. government doesn't make our helicopters. We would have the worst helicopters and jets in the world for sure. We pay for, this money goes to private contracting. So I don't see why increasing the federal budget and that money going to charter schools wouldn't be a solution. It's just that, and to me, this also ties into the cultural issue where I kind of, I have this idea. I would say, just to what you said about throwing money at it, an overhaul of the curriculum and how education works, I think is fundamental, but is a different conversation. I think Sal Khan should be, dictator of education for life. He has all kind of brilliant ideas for how to make it better. But it's also, if you have, I've seen just beautiful big schools out, not in inner cities. And you have this, if if these things were open 24/7, those people who don't have a home and you know, their homes are places that they're running away from. Well, you know, this a beautiful school with sports programs and teachers who are well funded and care, and you know everything. You know, expenses should be increased on the right things, but making this a safe haven. You know, like out there is it is what it is, and it takes a lot of work to fix it. But here, you're safe. You have your friends, and you can you know find a place to be yourself, and not follow the same path that everybody else is. I don't know. I could talk about this forever, but I don't know if you guys want to keep going, or we could spend the last 10 minutes talking about affirmative action. Up to you.
We should probably talk about affirmative action because, I mean, like, I would love to talk about like educational stuff as well. One of the things I was going to mention as well was the achievement gap. And one of the things that I noticed, particularly in my high school, was that so we have like these leveled courses, right, from like level 2 to like level 5 or whatever. So what I've noticed every time I walk down the halls, or when I walked down the halls, I should say, is in these level 2 and level 3 classes, you mostly see like Hispanic and Black students. In these level 5 and 6 classes, you mostly see like white and like East Indian and Asian people. So I think that's like another thing to address with public schools generally, but or just schools in general, because not having it, like having a non-integrated education could also just make someone feel very uncomfortable with where they are and make them feel like very inferior. It like imposes some sort of imposter syndrome. I really wish that, you know, the administration would at least like come up with some, I don't know, tutoring initiatives, or like even like advertise more towards families more, so that it could actually encourage these students to be like more proactive, or families to be more proactive about trying to like bolster themselves. But I mean, that's one of the biggest questions in education. That seems like another very long discussion. I mean, we could move on to affirmative action.
You guys want to start, or I'm not?
Okay, so this is kind of interesting because after talking with you, Tyler, I'm still on the side of either reforming affirmative action or just completely eliminating it. I think the byproduct that it's having is not so much the intention that it's supposed to have. Just reading historically, I know affirmative action, not so much in like job or career, but also in education, was meant to like give a support for Black Americans who are like wrongfully like held back from educational opportunities. Another reason why historically Black colleges were actually created, but that's another story. But it was eliminated because, of course, Republican politicians thought individuality was important and merit was important, and they successfully demonstrated that they could individually succeed in the educational system as well. So I see why there's like a lot of debate about it. So personally, I would rather reform affirmative action such that it focuses more on accepting students with a lower socioeconomic or class background, which seems like disproportionately, like if you're addressing racial inequality, it would be disproportionately Black or Hispanics. As well as accepting students based on their healthcare access or the lack thereof. And it doesn't have to emphasize race really, but it's more race neutral, and it like prevents the byproduct of discriminating by race. Otherwise, if that doesn't work, which I may foresee some issues with that, it would be better to just focus on educational systems and make sure they're better prepared for a rigorous elite educational system, as opposed to focusing on something that is going to have like terrible repercussions afterwards.
Could we quickly define like what exactly is affirmative action How does it work? Is it just if you- is it like there's just a certain percentage of students who are who have the affirmative action and are like placed into the school, or how does it work? Or is it like if two people get the same score, and if one is one race, then the other is accepted versus the other? How does it work?
I can touch on that. So constitutionally, they tried. There's been many different forms of affirmative action. So in its essence, affirmative action is taking race into account to help increase the number of minority people at a university. There's the first one you mentioned has been defined as unconstitutional, having a quota or a certain percentage or a number or a certain point value you attach to it. That was established in Gratz v. Bollinger. Then the same university, but instead it's law school at Michigan, I believe. The law school was a little more nuanced with the way they wrote their affirmative action program, and it was such that it was a holistic, like the whole term of like holistic admissions, they kind of initiated that, where it's essentially it's a plus factor which is undefined, and since it's an undefined plus factor, the court determined it was constitutionally permissible. Scalia had some things to say about how permissible to do things with winks and nods that are not permissible to do outright. There's some constitutional controversy there, but that in essence right now it's that plus factor is what is seen as permissible.
I'm happy to jump in whenever. So I support affirmative action more so at universities like Ivy League institutes, Ivy Plus. I don't think it's as important when it comes down to the state level. The reason why is so I've attended 2 community colleges. I've been in state schools, and now I'm at Princeton. And as far as teaching goes, there's not much of a difference. I've had great teachers and I've had bad teachers in both locations. The difference is resources and networking when you get to places like Princeton. I was shocked when I got here to read, every day in the Daily Princetonian, it was, class of so-and-so said on the Senate floor, class of so-so CEO of this company. And I was just shocked to understand that, between these, the alumni of these schools, how much the power concentrated. And this is not necessarily, in my opinion, this isn't because of the quality of the education. I think there's a great education here. But as far as the actual teaching, it's really the same teaching and just an increase in the demand of what you're supposed to have at the end, aka test scores, or the rigor of the test. But it's for in STEM, it's what resource or research opportunities exist for law. It's the name Princeton itself opens so many doors. For politics, it's the alumni works. I mean, all these things help all these different facets, and that's the difference. So when we're talking about, I could care less if I go back home in Michigan State or Purdue University as not as heterogeneous as we'd like to hope, but places like Princeton will have a net effect on the country and the makeup, the demographics of who's at the top. And that's nothing you can get away from. And the fact that if we just repealed all affirmative action, there's nothing that would stop that Princeton would be almost entirely dominated by whites, Asians, and Indians. And there's, we can say that they have the most merit and they deserve to be there, but in the end, I think when it comes to the fact that these are going to be government leaders and CEOs, that we should be very concerned on who's going to be sitting in those positions at the very top, the peak, which is what this place is a funnel for. And we should be doing everything we can to make sure that's representative of the country, and the different voices. And that's why I'm actually a fan of holistic admissions. I think it's kind of a scapegoat where they say, well, we're going to bump up, the number of Black students, and all of a sudden there's I won't cuss. There's a lot of very wealthy African family children coming here, and there's not that much of a bump in Black Americans, from that represent the range of Americans in the U.S. I just think you need to actually dive down and say, like, who are you and where do you come from? Everybody's got 4.0 GPAs and did all these incredible things in their high school. Blows me away all the time. So at the end, we're going to bicker over SAT scores and ignore the fact that what we should be wanting here is the most diverse range of people. I think bar nothing, the most important thing about Princeton is that the diversity of world experiences, and that's what I personally gained the most from being here. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and to touch on SAT scores, I think they're complete BS.
Yes.
The SAT was invented by a person attempting to separate by class and by race, and it was also a system to decide who would be the factory workers and the managers. There's a lot of very classist, very iffy things in the SAT's history, and standardized tests do not correspond well with future outcomes, besides the fact that they act as an inhibitor to future outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
You see it not being good for people with an entrepreneurial mindset, people with an artistic mindset, musical mindset, things like that. The test doesn't accurately reflect their abilities. I think Einstein once said something like, if you tell us, it's like a snake, you have a competition and it's like a snake like versus a monkey climbing the tree, okay, it's not a fair fight. So SAT is a problem. I don't think affirmative action is always the right way to fix the issue. Having a good supply of students from minority backgrounds who are well prepared, and I think that goes back to fixing the high schools and fixing the high school dropout rate. I think it ties back into that as being the biggest thing and really setting minority students up for success. But yeah, and I do agree on a difference in between private and public affirmative action. Public schools do not have a constitutional mandate to have extremely exclusive schools with the highest admission standards, whether that's a law school or whatever. They have a mandate to teach the students. And so if they need to lower their standards to make things more equitable, I think that should be done rather than attempting to artificially change numbers and things like that. I think they need to just figure out what their mandate is, because I don't think that they're following it.
There's also two ways of approaching this, because if you were to keep affirmative action, there is a possibility that those who have been enrolled in the school but may not have the highest academic credentials are more likely to drop out. So it wasn't even worth getting in the first place. But like you mentioned, there are some significantly different resources that you would find in a school like Princeton as opposed to a community college, or networking resources. So you could either have a more transparency or more initiative to provide these resources for those who are perform academically lower or something like that, so that they're able to catch up to speeds in the first year and not be likely to drop out. Or like Peter said, focus more on high school systems and make sure that the educational standards there are set such that they are more prepared when going into schools like this.
Yeah, that's something definitely agree with a lot as well. I can say quickly that it's so weird to find myself related to this, but being a veteran, Princeton's perfect example. Before my cohort came in, there was only one veteran on campus. All of a sudden, so I'm a senior now, and I think we have I think we're up in 25, 26. So there's a relation to these things where changing certain policies all of a sudden let these people in. And I've seen a lot of veterans who came in and wanted to be doctors, mathematicians, all these different things, and went into like essentially the machine gun, the blender that is Princeton in these fields, and got spit out and changed their career paths. And I'm totally receptive of this happening to Black students. I've heard like some people say, or any other race, that we just destroyed a generation of Black doctors and stuff like that. And like you said, there should be no reason we should be doing everything to. Nobody looks down on a Black doctor from IU or something like that. That's where the majority of these people, doctors go, and they're excellent institutions. I just think a lot of that, like you said, can be mitigated by preparatory programs, mandatory that you go to, or not mandatory. But I think anybody would voluntarily take the summer as a prep program. New York has some of that stuff for some of their schools because there's issues with this. There's a lot of ways to go about fixing that issue, rather than saying, okay, well, we're gonna let go on the things that got you here to begin with.
I think one of the toughest things with affirmative action, I was watching a Woke Wednesdays video earlier today, and there was this confession. It said, part of being Black at Princeton is the constant need to prove that affirmative action is not the reason why you're here. And every person that was reading that responded, facts. And that's kind of unfortunate, and I find that concerning that African American students at Princeton specifically, but then elsewhere, consider that to be the reason when they're among the most accomplished people. Rebecca right here has a higher GPA than me in CBE, so
I don't know.
I feel that's one of the things I feel most terrible about it with the experience of having affirmative action and things, and just how it complicates the college experience.
Yeah. Well,
So we have 3 minutes left, right? So I don't know how we want to wrap this up.
We just want to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about in the future, since weren't able to touch on everything. Like we didn't go in depth as much about maybe police reform or.
I definitely want to
topics.
hear about Citizens United. If you ever get the opportunity, and I don't know, me and Rebecca briefly talked about maybe discussing affinity spaces. I think I would love to have those conversations. They would be super cool.
Yeah, I have a feeling that we disagree quite significantly on Citizens United, so that should be an interesting discussion.
So, police reform, affinity spaces, Citizens United, and
Well, this was fun. Thanks for your time. Honestly, I won't take up more of your time, but it was a great discussion. I'll send the recording to everyone to glow over or something. And have a good Friday. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's nice outside, so please go out. By
the way, I just want to say, if anyone who's watching, anyone. If you're a Princeton student, if you're a professor, if you're at another university, whatever. If you disagree with us, come talk to us. Like we don't care. We don't care if you offend us, if you hurt our feelings. We just want to talk. We want someone who disagrees with us strongly. It's just, you know, a lot of people are afraid. Like they're some of my friends wanted to come, but we're thinking of coming, but they don't want to put their name. They're afraid. So please just come and talk to us.
Yeah.
We don't even agree with each other.
Yeah.
I think the best way to find solutions is you take it, look at it from all sides, you examine it, and then you figure out from there what makes the most sense. And these are huge problems that are facing us, and I think it takes some nuance.
See you guys.
See ya.
Yes.